Welcome to the I'm All Over the Place podcast. I'm Dara Star Tucker. I am so glad to have you with me today for this very, very special episode of the podcast featuring Miss Holly Robinson Peete. If you grew up in the era that I did, you would remember her from 21 Jump Street. That's kind of my first reference for Holly Robinson. But of course, Holly Robinson Peete went on to have a prolific career in television. She did Hangin with Mr. Cooper, which I'm sure we all remember from our childhoods. She married Rodney Peete, who was a football player, and together they founded the HollyRod Foundation, a wonderful charitable organization that has been going strong for something like 20 years and has really been instrumental in helping families work through difficulties around autism. They also work with Alzheimer's disease. So just a terrific career that Holly Robinson Peete has had thus far, and we will discuss all aspects of it. But I'm doing a special group of episodes for the month of October, 4 episodes that feature fathers and daughters, and you'll have to stay tuned to find out who my other very, very special guests are. And we're going to end the month with a guest that you would maybe not expect in this series of episodes about fathers and daughters. So I'm really excited about the content that we have coming for you this October. So we're going to talk to Holly about her dad. Her dad is a man named Matt Robinson. And if you're old enough to remember Sesame Street in its early days, you will remember Matt Robinson as the first Gordon on Sesame Street. And he was quite the trailblazer. He worked as a diversity consultant on the show and had just a very interesting and varied past. And Holly had a very, very interesting upbringing. Both her father and mother were pioneers in the entertainment industry. So she will talk some about her upbringing and then how that led her to where she is now in her career. So really excited for you to hear this episode with Holly. She was so dear to come and do this for me after seeing the breakdown that I did on her father, which I will have reposted to YouTube and to all of my socials so you can see kind of the synopsis of the story of her father's time with Sesame Street. But stay tuned for this very special episode of the I'm All Over the Place podcast. You can find me on Patreon, patreon.com/Dara Star Tucker, Dara with 1 R, Star with 2. You can find me on Instagram at Dara Tucker B. And on all other platforms, X, formerly Twitter, Threads, and TikTok and YouTube, you can find me at Dara Star Tucker, Facebook as well. And I also want to let you know that I will be at Blues Alley in Washington, D.C. on the 15th of October. This is 2023, of course. I will be there with my band performing music. I also share a lot of my thoughts that I do in the breakdown and just have some conversation during those shows. I think you'll enjoy it. If you're in the D.C. area or if you have family and friends in D.C., please spread the word. Let them know we are coming to D.C. on Sunday, the 15th of October. I would love to meet you in person. If you are a listener to the podcast, if you're a viewer of the breakdown, please come by and say hello. I would love to have you. Go to darastartucker.com or you can go to the Blues Alley website at bluesalley.com. So without further ado, we're going to get on to the Holly Robinson Peete episode. Please enjoy, and I hope to see you really, really soon. Wonderful. Thank you so much for making time for this.
I was really looking. I'm getting ready to drink some coffee because I haven't had that yet. But I was really looking forward to this. Thank you for the awesome. It's not knowledge, but just the presence that you keep out there, not just for my dad, but just for other people. You just really have your finger on the pulse of what it is we need to know and who we need to remember.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to bring more attention to people like your dad, because honestly, I hadn't even heard. I didn't know. People would always talk about, the first Gordon. He was the first Gordon, and I had heard people say that your dad was the first Gordon, but I never saw him. I never saw clips of the show. I didn't know anything about it before. I don't know when I became aware of him, but it's been very recently, like in the last couple of years. And so, yeah, I think a lot of people are probably in the same position as me and are like, it all feels very mysterious because it was like Sesame Street before I knew what was even going on. So,
right. Well, and also, it was during a time when, at least, you really had to be my age. I'll be in a couple weeks. I'll be 59.
Okay.
I'm feeling some kind of way about that.
You look 39, so you should feel really good about that.
I feel good about it, but, like, all the 59-ish things are happening to my body.
Yeah.
It's like, "Wait." But I say that to say that if you are my age and you remember when Sesame Street started, not the least of which that it was my dad that started it, but just even if people that I meet that are my age, and that were like 4, 5, 6, 7 in the late 60s, they are just like if they don't know already, because I talk about it all the time. I'm talking about it for 30 some years, my whole
Mhm.
career. But if they don't know, they trip because that my dad, the first Gordon, the first 3 or 4 years, it was a different energy.
Mhm.
He brought
Mhm.
something really unique and different, and he brought stuff that was ahead of his time. I was just saying to someone yesterday, because talking about Roosevelt Franklin, his Muppet, and Roosevelt Franklin was so ahead of his time that he was rapping 55 years ago. How old is hip hop? 50? Roosevelt was rapping before rap. That's how far ahead of his time my dad was and his creations were. So, anyway, my point is that if you didn't know, people don't know that my dad was Gordon from Sesame Street. He's
Mhm.
usually not the Gordon they remember, but he set that tone.
Mhm. And I didn't realize until today that he left in 1972. So kind of maybe the story as I'm understanding it isn't quite as I have laid it out, like in terms of the timeline, because I thought he stayed for I know they said Roosevelt Franklin himself was on there for probably 6 years. So was there a period where he was doing the Roosevelt Franklin character and he was not actually on the show, your dad?
That's a good question. I'll have to ask my mom about that, but I think they had some things in the bank.
Okay.
Pretty
Okay,
sure
that
they
makes
had
sense.
I'm pretty sure they had stuff, like, already locked
Okay.
in that my dad didn't have to be part of
Yeah.
until they eventually just phased him out.
Okay. Okay, because yeah, I heard that whole uproar happened and maybe like finally came to a head and probably, I don't know if it was 74, 75, or something like that. And that's when they finally took the character off the show. But your dad had been gone since 72.
Yeah, and the uproar was, basically driven by Black parents,
Mm-hmm.
or that's at least what we were led to believe at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Because my dad was one of the only Black voices in the room in the very early days, he was not able to tell them that it was important that while all the Muppets were different colors and while all the characters were different colors, that the Black children needed to be talked to like Black children,
Mm-hmm.
and that they needed to see themselves not just in other kids in the class and other kids in the school, in the scenes, like with Roosevelt Franklin, for instance, but just they needed to be related to in a certain way and seen in a certain way, and my dad wasn't able to convey that. They really wanted to go with the purple world of, all the Muppets don't have colors, so let's make them purple, but let's not have them act so Black.
Mm-hmm.
And and so it was a really interesting time. I was way too young to figure it out at the time,
Mm-hmm.
what was going on, but I do feel very good about it 50 something years later because finally, thanks to people like yourself and other people who understand the history of Sesame Street, we are able to get some real information out on the chronology on how all this unfolded
Mm-hmm.
and unpacked. And my brother and my mom and I were part of a really great documentary that I urge everyone to watch called Street Gang: How We Got to Sesame Street. It's about the early days, and they let us, the producers let us, his family, tell that story. And
Mm-hmm.
I learned stuff because my mom shared in her portion of it things that I didn't even know
Wow.
uh, about his frustrations during that time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but so when I look up all these years later and see that they've now introduced Black characters, I think that's really interesting. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
So happy. But I just think it's so interesting
Yeah.
that it's a Black family and they're talking about washing Black hair and, and the things Black people deal with. I love Sesame Street because they do figure it out
Mm-hmm.
at some point. It may take them a minute, but they do figure it out. So
Yeah.
props to them. But the irony of having seen my dad try to tell them this very important piece of the audience was not being served completely was interesting. Even when, I mean, over the years, they've obviously done some amazing. They had Jesse Jackson on there talking about "I am somebody." Like
Mhm.
they had some amazing visual, people could see things. But when it came to the Muppets, my dad was adamant about how they are not serving a certain part of the community, which was supposed to be
Mm.
the core audience.
Yes. Yeah. And in that documentary that you mentioned, they go out of there because I did an entire episode of my little on, I never know what to call it, like these little micro documentaries called The Breakdown. And I did an entire, breakdown on the fact that Sesame Street was made for inner city kids. And they have, gone out of their way to say that was the core audience. And it was a very different show back then. I mean, even from, your dad's days, it was a different show than what it was by the time, my time came along in the 80s. I guess I never even properly introduced you or talked about what we're going to talk about. If you don't know, this is Miss Holly Robinson Peete.
Hey,
And
everybody.
from 21 Jump Street, that's just where that just forever will be where I place you in my mind and in my heart.
I'm
But
okay with that.
obviously,
I love that show. I love that show. I've been watching it. So I'm in my office, and I guess there's one of these, I don't know if it's Samsung or one of them, that just has a whole channel of 21 Jump Street, and it just
oh
plays
wow,
constantly. And I mean, all day long episodes.
yeah,
So my assistant put it on and was like, "Do you know about this channel?" And I had heard about it, and I put it on, and I was watching some episodes yesterday that I didn't remember. Like, I was like,
wow.
"What happens next?" I don't remember that, but I love that show. I'm very proud of it. I love that character, Judy Hopps. I wish I could have been her forever. I wish I could be on that show still. I would be the captain by now, or the mayor or something, running something, but I love that show, and I'm glad you have an appreciation for it.
Yeah, I just have fun. Yeah, really vague memories, actually, but very fond memories of just that being the period of time where I became, and most people became aware of you. But of course, some folks will know you from hanging with Mr. Cooper. Some folks, and what else? Can you just kind of
There was
throw
a
out a couple of
show there
that?
was a sh well, it's weird because after I went from Jump Street to Cooper, and it was, um, like one it came one after the other, right? And
Mm,
so I went from this serious drama where I was, helping kids in high school get over all the kind of issues that were going on in the world. And then, like, from that, I become Vanessa, my character from Hanging with Mr. Cooper, who's just goofy as hell and very materialistic, but also very fun to play. But the thing about that was I had to convince the producers that I could be funny.
mm,
That's a
mhm,
totally different muscle, going
mhm.
from 1 hour episodic to, half-hour comedy, 4 cameras
Yeah,
in front of a live audience. That's a different vibe. So
yeah.
I had to prove that I could do that.
Mhm.
And boy, was that fun. I'm so glad I got a chance to do that. I have the best memories of that show, of Cooper, um, especially because my husband proposed to me on the set there, so
Yeah,
that was extra dope, amazing.
we all remember
Um,
that.
but beyond that, after that, I did a show called For Your Love, which when I tell you, out of all the shows I've done, it is my favorite
Oh
in
wow.
that just on the levels of writing, on
Mhm.
what it brought to television. It was about 3 different couples and 3 different stages of love. We were on NBC, we were on a big network. After
Mm.
That About You, which was a huge hit for them, and then, our numbers were really good, but there was some political something that happened, and, we ended up on the WB.
Oh wow.
Which that time was really taking advantage of some of these Black shows that were not getting the love, but even though they were really, really good. So,
Mhm.
went on to do, For Your Love, and love that, and then after that, just, bounced around a lot from different, types of gigs, did, Mike and Molly for a while and Chicago Fire for a while, and had fun just doing different characters and bridging that gap between comedy and drama. Um, did that, famous Diana Ross, job on
On the
the Jacksons,
Jacksons.
An American Dream. To
Yeah.
this day, probably my most watched piece of work because they used to run that
Yes.
every 5 seconds on VH1, and it still gets played a lot. That was a dream come true, that job. I still can't believe that, A, I got to do that. I got to work with Vanessa Williams and Angela Bassett and Larry,
Mm,
all those talented kids, that played, the Jackson family,
mhm.
and Terrence Howard, who people don't even realize was there and was
Wow.
on there, um, played Jackie, but, yeah, just bounced around, but at the end of the day, and I think you know this about me, that my focus is philanthropy.
Yes.
So, like, I've been running this nonprofit, HollyRod Foundation, for 25 years, and
Mm,
that's, like, my 5th child. That's where my heart is. So,
mhm.
while I enjoy being on TV, I love it, I don't sit around and go, "Oh, I wish I could win an Emmy or Oscar." I sit around going, "Oh, I hope I can get this grant. I hope I
Wow.
can go more RJ's places." That's sort of where my heart is.
Mhm.
Currently, I'm doing a new show called Queen's Court. So Queen's Court is a, dating show, a twist on a dating show that my husband and I host for Peacock. We did it last season. It did very well, and we're gonna shoot the next season very, very shortly. So
Okay.
that's it on my little bio. Now I'll let you talk.
Well, I it's kind of interesting because I really don't do a whole lot of interviews for the podcast at all. We're more of kind of like, we'll pick a theme, pick a topic, and just kind of discuss that and talk about, lots of cultural issues around, whatever race or whatever happens to be going on. But I have kind of gotten into a spate of doing just a few interviews, a handful of interviews, and you're one of them. And because I've bugged you, and I've come back a couple of times and been like, "Hey, do you have time? Is this a good time?" But I have really wanted to talk to you specifically about your dad, and I just had a conversation with Bernie Mac's daughter, Janice McCullough,
Oh, I love
about
Janice.
yeah, everyone. I realized from the pictures of the anniversary of your foundation. I'm like, Holly is connected to
That's
everybody.
from being around so long. That's really what and getting up in people's faces.
But yeah, I just had a conversation with her about her dad, and then in a couple of weeks, I'm going to have a conversation with Layla Hathaway about her dad. And
Nice.
so, yeah, we're going to have this kind of nice little trifecta of interviews. Again, I don't do that very often, but just kind of had I don't know, like a pull to like talk about dads. And maybe it's because my dad has been on my mind lately or something, but we're just in a dad zone. And so, um, I just want to kind of get at that, I guess that thing that only children can really zero in on about their parents. I mean, you speak, and your brother would be able to speak from a very specific point of view, that
Mhm.
no one else would be able to have, of him and who he was on a fundamental level. So really, I kind of want to. I'm in Philly now. I live in Philly, and I haven't even been here a year. Um, so I don't know the city. I'm
That's
sorry. What
already
did
setting the stage. That's already
you
giving me vibes. Go ahead. Yeah.
So I don't know the city very much because the kind of work that I do, it just leaves me indoors all the time. And every once in a while I'll get out. So I don't feel like I really have like bonded with the city yet. So I guess I want to first ask like what your relationship is with Philly. Were you born here? How long did you stay? Did you eventually move to New York with your dad? Like you and Philly, how does that work?
Whew, me and Philly. We have a very intense relationship.
Mm,
I was born in Philadelphia at Lincoln
okay.
Hospital, in Philadelphia. Um, my life, my roots, my heart is in Philly. My
Mm,
mother and my father, both their families were born in Philly, so it's Philly all day long.
yeah.
Um, uh, Lived in West Philadelphia for a while, and then my dad, when he got Sesame Street, we like the Jeffersons, we went on up to
Yeah.
Mount Airy. And Mount Airy was at the time in the late '60s, Mount Airy was just like the utopian neighborhood.
Oh
I'm
wow.
talking, we had everybody. We had blacks, whites, Jews, we had even had families from Iraq, from Japan, from it was the melting pot. Like the
Mm.
people that were there were from all walks of life, and it gave me a kumbaya type of childhood
Yeah.
start. Like I didn't understand what any place that didn't have diversity, what that meant, right? Because that
Mm.
was everything. My neighbors, we celebrated um, um, Hanukkah with them, and they celebrated Kwanzaa with us, and Christmas with us. We celebrate Kwanzaa very early. Um,
Mhm.
so it was just a great childhood, great place to grow up.
Yeah.
My dad, as we spoke of earlier, got Sesame Street. That didn't do great things for his marriage to my mother.
Hmm.
Was commuting back and forth from Philly to New York.
I was
So
about
he
to say that had to be tough. Like Mount Airy, that's a suburb of Philadelphia, but he's doing a show in New York. That's got to be hard.
Yeah, it was, and it was especially hard for my mom,
Mm.
and my dad was kind of doing his thing on the side.
Mm.
So he was it was rough. It was rough on her. I was confused. I talk about how I love Sesame Street and everything, but as a as a 5-year-old and my parents aren't doing good, and I'm looking up on a television show that I'm just figuring TV out, right? Like, are
Mhm.
those people real? Can you reach into the TV? And I'm looking at my daddy walking down the street with another lady named Susan, who's his wife, and some other little kids. I was like,
Confused.
oh my God, I was totally confused. And I was a very precocious, chatty child. So
Yeah.
I begged to be on Sesame Street. Everybody on my block got to go up. Everybody got to
Mm.
go up to New York and be on Sesame Street but me.
Oh,
And I
wow.
couldn't figure it out. I was like, "What's going on? Like, where is the can a girl get some nepotism? Look in here, like, what are we doing here?" And I realized my dad was holding me back. And finally, I begged and pleaded, and I got to go up. I had one line. My line was supposed to be, "Hi, Gordon," but I kept saying, "Hi, Daddy." And I ended up losing my line. So, so it's so funny. And just recently, Dara, I came across when Bob died. Bob from Sesame Street passed
Mhm.
away recently. And when he passed, somebody from his family unearthed and sent me some footage of me on Sesame Street that I've been looking for forever.
Oh, wow.
And I saw me and talking with Bob. And when I tell you I was talking over him, I would let him finish his story. Then they put me in a scene with the lady drawing. I was trying to grab the pen out the lady's hand to show her how to draw. Then they put me in a scene with my dad, and I was a little more intimidated around my dad. But I was like, okay, I understand why y'all didn't want me on there. I was doing too much. I get it. I was doing way too much. So, but it was this amazing experience, right? It was still like my
Yeah.
dad was super, super popular. He hated being in front of the camera. He did not like
Mm.
writer. His father was a writer for the Negro newspaper in
Mhm.
Philadelphia. He had a lot of emotional generational trauma in his life.
Mm.
I
Mhm.
discovered I was in my 20s,
Mhm.
where his sister, who was about 8 at the time, and my dad was maybe about 3 or 4, had scarlet fever in Philadelphia, and the white hospital would not treat her.
Oh my goodness.
Scarlet fever was treatable with antibiotics and all kinds of things, but they wouldn't treat her, and by
Mm.
the time she got to the black hospital that would treat her, the black doctor, she passed.
Mm.
And that shut down my grandfather because he almost tried to kill everybody in that white hospital. They had to keep him from, you know, from doing any further damage to the family by losing him, by going to jail,
Yeah.
which is understandable. And then my grandmother became just smothering, overbearing, and a worrywart.
Mhm.
So my dad's father shut down. So it's just the father did not have an emotional person to really go to, and it shut him down.
Hmm.
And then he had a younger brother, Gene, who was just a baby when all this happened. So moving forward in his life, when he met my mom, he was this brilliant guy, but he also just had all these emotional blocks in him. So he just couldn't convey love.
Mhm.
and he couldn't do that, and I just took it so personally my whole life until he was 21 until I was 21, and he expressed to me he actually showed me a letter that one of his cousins wrote him about that time and what happened during the time when my Aunt Sheila passed away.
Mhm.
And so, gosh, that just opened up everything.
Mm.
Like, all of a sudden, you get this big giant piece of a puzzle laid in your lap about why your father didn't love you, or you thought he didn't love you, or he
Mhm.
didn't express love to you. It was so intense, and I'm so glad that I was able to learn that. Now, mind you, at the same time, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease.
Right.
So his body was failing him.
Mhm.
He was feeling all kinds of karma stuff like, this is because I, was a bad father or husband, whatever. Now look at my body's failing me. But this was in the 80s. We didn't have Google, nothing. We didn't have Muhammad Ali wasn't even talking about
Right.
it. Um, so I just remember being very young, but wanting to help him and wanting to drop out of college to help him. My dad was like all about education. So he was like, "You are not dropping out of college to caregive for me." And so, I'll stop there and let you ask quick because I can go on forever. It's a
I
really
love when people can interview themselves because I'm just like,
you
"Mhm,
just
yeah,
gotta
right,
let
right."
me just sit back and listen. No, but I don't wanna be that person, so I'm gonna stop here, have some more coffee, and let you go.
I've had 34 questions in the course of things, but I just almost prefer to just listen to you talk because you can
No,
go some places that I couldn't. So, um, well, I guess I want to ask how did they find your dad? Like Joan Gans Cooney was the person who kind of, was over the Children's Television Workshop. And I've kind of told that story in that breakdown about Sesame Street being made for inner city kids. But like, he was in Philly. Like, how did they even find him?
they found him because he was working on a show in Philadelphia. He was a pretty popular Black, TV personality in Philadelphia at the local, CBS affiliate,
Okay.
WCAU, and basically what he did, he had a show called Black Book. And the show was about Black change makers and society and social change. And he had a show that would he wore dashikis. It was heavy, right? And he was
Hmm.
talking about things. This was 68. So he was talking
Yeah.
about that were going on in the world. And this was the year Martin Luther King was killed. So
Hmm.
it was some heavy stuff going on. And his show was quite popular. And when they were trying to find people to be consultants on Sesame Street, his name came up because of the work he was doing on TV in Philly. So
Okay.
that's how he became someone in the room. And I
Mhm.
have this amazing photo of him, and I almost feel like you used it in your breakdown of him sitting in the room, listening to them talk in this big room with Joan and all
Mhm.
these people that were trying to put Sesame Street together. So that's how they found him based on the work that he was already doing. And there's an article that's so crazy that I still have that was written in the Philadelphia newspaper. And it was like the headlines were like Negro man starts. That's how they started off. And I always have it everywhere just to keep me grounded. Like when I think about, where we are now. Negro man wants to start late night TV show. And it was this big article about how my dad, who was doing some local stuff, had the audacity to think that he could do a national show
Hmm.
when there were no Black men on national TV at that part. I think it was like Jack Parr, it was on the Tonight Show or whatever. Um, so yeah, so that's how they found him because he was making waves locally in Philadelphia. And then
Mhm.
they were like, come on up and consult on this show. And then there was an original Gordon or OG
Right.
that didn't quite pan out. So my dad stepped in.
Mhm. And why didn't he initially want to be on camera? Was he just kind of a retiring kind of person, and he just didn't feel that he just wasn't comfortable in front of the camera, or why? Why didn't he want to do
Didn't
the
like
show?
the whole celebrity thing. He hated
Mm.
the whole celebrity,
Even though he was a host, he already did that here in Philly, though.
yeah, but he was driving real stuff, right? So he
Yeah.
was willing to use his face to do that, but when it came to, like, doing things that were more, actory, he didn't wanna do that.
Mhm. Okay.
He was delivering information to the
Mhm.
people. So that's a different story, but he was able to based on what Sesame Street was about, he was able to really justify, okay, and he always felt like I'm gonna do this for a little while, but when he saw the opportunity to create Roosevelt and to do music with Roosevelt, because he also loved music,
Mhm.
um, he was like, "Oh, you know what? This could work out."
Mhm.
So yeah, but he did not like it, and then I didn't help matters because when he was, Gordon, kids in my neighborhood were like, "Your daddy's Gordon?" And I'm 5 and 6, right? He would come home from New York, and he would all he wanted to do was get him a hoagie and go to sleep,
Yeah.
right? And he didn't wanna be bothered and nothing, but people were like, "Yo, your dad is Gordon. If you show me your dad, I'll give you 25 cents." So, my brother Matt and I were like, "Yo, this little side hustle over here." So, because it was just too easy. You walk in and you peep at him, and I would get a quarter, we could go get us some small fries up on Stanton Avenue, like, "What?" So, we did this for a while until we got busted. Um, I am embarrassed to tell that story, but, look, I was a kid just trying to get some extra french fry money, and the money was too easy, it was just too easy.
Oh.
But I felt like I was feeling guilty about that for so many years because I got punished, obviously, for that.
Mhm.
I felt like that was the reason why he quit.
Mm.
For years, I felt like that. I was like, "Me and my little
Wow.
side hustle made him quit," but he just didn't like it. He he didn't like it, and he didn't like it, and then I didn't know some of the things that was going on behind the scenes about him
Mm.
trying to get Sesame Street to understand the political climate, understand the mind of a young Black child and what they need to see with the Muppets.
Mhm. Mhm.
Uh, and so it really wasn't about me. And actually, later on, when my dad and I had this sort of come to Jesus moment, he told me about his childhood trauma, which explained a lot of his issues. He was like, "You thought all the whole time is because you was hawking, looking at your dad, come look at Gordon for 25 cents." He goes, "That was a little well, it was bad. It was bad, but, that wasn't the reason why."
Was that the reason for him
Breaking
leaving the
news.
show?
I don't tell that story very much, but feel comfortable saying it here.
Well, so what I guess I kinda wanna generally know because of the weird kind of timeline of when the the character stopped appearing on the show. That was much later than when he actually had left the show. So he was going through kind of political stuff behind the scenes and kind of wrestling. 'Cause I actually was gonna ask you about that. Like, they brought him on as essentially what we would probably call now as like a diversity consultant. That was part of what he was doing, was making sure to make sure that this stuff was grounded in in blackness. Really, I mean, that was part of his job. Is like, we want you here because you are Black and because you work in television, and we don't want a bunch of white folks sitting around in a room deciding what Black children see. But still, behind the scenes, he was not being listened to, it sounds like.
He
What
wasn't being
kind
listened to. He wasn't.
Yeah, what kind of battles was he fighting, and with whom? I mean, I guess if you know.
Well, I mean, there were 2 levels, right? You have to remember Sesame Street was becoming it was this, public television show, but it was becoming a massive
Yeah,
money maker.
yeah.
Like, I mean, they were not ready for the money that this show was generating
Yeah.
in market in branding, and the brand, Sesame Street brand had taken off. The
Mhm.
very first year, and they were so smart about it. The very first year of the show, they went around and did Sesame Street Live. My
Mhm.
dad, Will Lee, who was Mr. Hooper, Bob and Susan Loretta Long, who played Susan, they went to these different places and gathered kids together. And Carol Spinney came out as Big Bird, and
Mhm.
they came out and said, "Hi, kids," and did little songs, and they were killing the game. I mean, it
Mhm.
was it out the box. And I think whenever you have that kind of success, but your motives are pure, for you're serving this certain audience, you can get lost between the for-profit and the nonprofit side.
Mhm.
And I think my dad was trying to say, okay, we can they can both work, but we have to stay true and not lose sight of what we're doing with these Muppets. Um,
Mhm.
and that's where Roosevelt came in. Roosevelt Franklin I mean, I said he was ahead of his time and rapping in his classroom and being a, Roosevelt Franklin's elementary school. But the music, I think right after that music was released was pretty much the writing on the wall. Why?
Mm,
Because, you had Jim Henson and you had all those Muppets that were doing numbers in books and music that were outrageous, right? Kermit the Frog had, It's Not Easy Being Green. I mean, there were some classics, Oscar had I Love Trash. All these songs were written and produced by Joe Raposo.
Joe Reposo,
Joe
that's right.
Raposo was a GOAT. When I tell
Yeah.
you this man was so brilliant. He
Mhm.
wrote obviously Sunny Day, Sweeping the he wrote obviously the main song, but all the music was Joe.
Yeah.
Joe and my dad were tight.
Mhm.
And they're listen, in any workspace, when you tight with somebody that's the cash cow, there was a lot of jealousy going on. And
Mm.
I do think that my dad, they were very jealous of my dad. They were very threatened by his brilliance. He
Mhm.
was so smart and so understood things long before anybody else did. And I think it was threatening to them.
Mm.
And when Roosevelt's music came out, and then you got Rosalind Cash to play the mother on Roosevelt Franklin, and she was and brought all her Rosalind stuff, like
Mhm.
in between Rosalind, Joe, and my dad, they made a spectacular record called
Mm.
Gordon from Sesame Street, Roosevelt Franklin. I'm looking at it. The Year of Roosevelt Franklin, Gordon's Friend from Sesame Street. That song to this day, me and my friend Terry, who's in the group En Vogue, we were playing it the other day. It's brilliant.
Mm.
And they just kind of phased it out.
Yeah.
And as they did his books too, because he's a brilliant writer.
Mhm.
His books were also amazing. So I just feel like there was a lot of jealousy. There
Mhm.
was a lot of you know, it was very successful and the for-profit piece of it kind of got in the way. And this is not to bash Sesame Street, because let me tell you, I mean, I still, when I look at the show, I still feel like it has a lot of the core values and the things that they used to do are still there, and they still advocate for kids in a way that's amazing.
Mhm.
But the truth is that back in the day, they wouldn't listen to him on a lot of things.
Mm. Which is a shame because that's what he was there for. So do you feel, I mean, and ultimately, at least the way that your mom kind of laid it out in that documentary Street Gang, which I agree, that Street Gang documentary on HBO is incredible. And I used a lot of that footage in my piece, both on the Sesame Street was made for inner city kids and then the one I did on your dad. But the way that she laid it out, it was the where she saw the beginning of the end was when the black families started to write in and say, hey, this character Roosevelt Franklin, it's too much, they're too unruly, this is portraying a type of blackness that we are not comfortable with. They are, inner city black kids, which again, the show is targeted to inner city black kids. But
Right.
this is an image that we don't really want out there. We don't want to be portrayed in this way. And the point I made, one of the points I made in the piece was like, this is a year after MLK died, 1969 when it first started, when Sesame Street first started,
Yep.
a year after the assassination of MLK. So we kind of have to remember also when this was placed, and so very few images of blackness on television at all. I mean,
Yeah.
just you could literally count them on one hand. But she, your mom definitely talked about how it was like the beginning of the end when all of this backlash started. How did that impact him?
Yeah, so did not know any of this one at the time, too young, but I know now that it impacted him. And by the way, I learned so much from my mom during watching her. I wasn't there when she shot her portion of the documentary, but I learned so much from her,
Hmm.
um, talking about how my dad was impacted. Yeah, it was demoralizing for him
Hmm.
that the people that were coming for Roosevelt and coming for what he felt was important to reflect were Black parents. In hindsight, I get it, because I do understand that it
Right.
was during a time where our image was very important and we didn't really have a lot of those images. I think they might have tried to get him to tone it down. I'm glad that he didn't as a result, because there's going to come a time when we're going to, I don't know, maybe you and I'll do it together, but we need to do really a deep dive on Roosevelt Franklin, not just Sesame Street, but on Roosevelt, and
Mm.
really, you know, what he what I think what he meant to the to Black children at that time.
Mm.
Um, if parents were looking going, "Oh, well, Roosevelt's in class and he's, you know, he's the teacher and he's cutting up and rapping, and he's doing this, that, and the other, you know, and but it was all these hidden gems in there. Like
Mhm.
they did this whole rap about, um, you know, my dad was crazy about his names. It was always somebody's name, you know, Wet Mop Weaver, or, you know, Lonesome
AB
Lewis, and like he had
ABC
some name,
They were cool names.
ABC Show, Mobily Mosley. I mean, everybody had a name.
Yeah.
But there was a moment, you know, in the classroom, I have a video of when they're talking about South Africa.
Okay. Yeah, 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 yeah.
South Africa, and they say, "Well, what do you think was in South Africa?" And then, you know, the kids in the class were like, "Lions and tigers and
Mhm.
jungles," and there's Roosevelt teaching this story about, "Oh, no, over here, there's
Mhm.
only this much jungle, but over here are diamonds, and
Mhm.
over here are other resources in the world, and here there's buildings, there's office buildings." So this was in the early 70s.
Yeah.
So, you know, being able to teach kids about what's in Africa other than Tarzan, you know what I
Right,
mean? That was a
right.
big deal. So I just felt like he was just too far ahead of his time. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
like these are really great lessons on the power of, you know, the blackness and
Mhm.
in the world, that we're not just, you know. And so for some kid that's sitting in Harlem watching this, and then to look up and go, "Hey, you know, did you know there were diamonds in South Africa and there's these mines and then there's this and there's that," you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
anyway, they were just things that I think were just they weren't ready for. It was a little too deep. And the fact that the Black parents were coming in, remember, this was a show that was banned in some southern states, right? So
Yeah.
they were Mississippi, they didn't even want to play Sesame Street just because they had Black people on it.
Mhm.
So I just think that um, my dad just the information that he wanted to share just wasn't on their agenda. And
Mm.
that's okay. I I'm glad he didn't acquiesce. I'm glad he came with it how he saw it and that it aired and that we have it.
Mhm.
That was sort of the beginning of the end, and then he would go on to do other things.
Mhm. So, what was because you're mid-60s, 1964, you were born, is that
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
Okay, so by the time he left, you would have been still a very young child, like 7 or 8 years old or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, how did your life change once he left the show? How did your lives change once he left?
I was mad. I was mad. That was my hookup, you know, and that was my hookup. You know, you
Did
took my
now
little
was
son
it weird?
out.
Did you get to see, like, the hands up the butts of the Muppets? Because 'Cause I've seen those pictures
Yeah,
and they
oh,
mess
yeah.
me up now as an adult. I can't imagine being a child and being like, "Kermit's got somebody's hand up his rear
Yeah,
end."
no, I saw more than that because I saw, like, we would have parties at our house. We would have, like, cast parties in Philly at
Wow.
our house, and Carol Spinney would come. Now Carol was my heart. Carol was
Mhm.
Oscar and Big Bird.
Yeah.
Carol would come, and Carol would just, like, take the Big Bird's head off and be just walking around with his head out. I'd be like, "Oh, shit." Wait, this is traumatizing. But as a young girl, when you see it and you're like, okay, I get this TV thing. I understand that, you know, I get it. But yeah, it was a little traumatizing. But so I was so aware of, you know, the process at Sesame Street at a young age. So it didn't freak me out. And it was just really cool to be able to, you know, experience that actually
Yeah.
being such a little girl.
Oh, that's cool, that's cool. And so after that, can you just kinda talk about what that was like for you all as a family when he left? I mean, what happened? How did your lives, like, shift?
Well, it was traumatizing because my mom and dad were not getting along.
Mm.
So that was happening behind the scenes and trying to figure out what that looked like, right? So
Mhm.
he's now out of a job. She's he's being unfaithful to her, somebody in New York.
Mhm.
She's feeling some kind of way. She was in her own right, she was doing things in Philly too. She was an on-camera person in Philadelphia as well,
Mhm.
doing these kid shows too. Like my mom
Mhm.
was, she was like low key, really, really like just a gangster. Like I don't understand how
Mm.
she was doing things like she was doing. She was a school teacher, basically,
Mhm.
born and raised in poverty. And when she met my dad, she thought he was brilliant, and that's what really turned her on about him, that he was just so smart. But their relationship was rough, and but she did go on to create her own like little niche in Philadelphia as well, little local TV shows.
Mm.
And when Sesame Street was over, I think it kind of triggered something in her, and she was like, "You know what? I gotta go. I gotta get out of Philly. I gotta reinvent." And she took us, me and my brother, put us in a station wagon and drove us across country to Los Angeles, more
Wow.
specifically Malibu, where there wasn't one other black face. No, sorry, Flip Wilson's kids were there. Now you probably too young to remember Flip Wilson, but
Oh, of course I know about Flip Wilson, of
yeah, well,
course.
you know about because you know about everybody before and after your time, but, um, Flip
Well,
Wilson was
Flip Wilson and, I think he and Gladys Knight had a show really briefly in the '80s that was kind of a Cosby sort of kinda Cosby thing. I don't know if
I
anyone
think
remembers this.
I don't remember that, but you just triggered it in my brain. I think I know which show you're talking about, but Flip was everything in the '70s, like,
Yeah.
show was so popular on
Yep.
TV, and and him cross-dressing and Geraldine, and he had a whole
Mhm.
character, and I mean, he was just brilliant, and
Yeah.
so we moved to Malibu, which I was miserable. My brother was like, "Yeah, where are we going? We on a vacation, on an adventure," but
Mhm.
I was miserable, and, but Flip's kids were the only other black kids in the neighborhood, so we were traumatized, and my dad was he didn't really have any wherewithal to be mad at my mom because he was not a good husband. So
Mhm.
she needed to get out. But I mean, man, it was such a culture shock. And my dad would write me these long letters about you're moving to La La Land. He hated LA. And you're
Mhm.
moving to where people don't know the difference between blood and ketchup. And he would write because my dad was a serious writer. So he'd write me these unbelievable letters that
Wow.
would, oh my God, they were so deep. I have them all and they were so
Oh,
deep.
how cool. You still
Yeah.
have them.
I do, I do.
Wow.
I'm gonna show them and share them at some point, but they're so intense. He just never wrote me just a regular birthday letter. It would always be like, well, my shipment of South African diamonds was late, so I wasn't able to get you anything. But what I will tell you is something you can keep for the rest of your life, and that is, that I love you. And like he started to tell me that when I was in my 20s, which was awesome.
Mm.
But yeah, so then that second sort of season of my childhood happened on the West Coast when my dad did not want to move out there. He hated LA, but
Mhm.
he had to. That's where the writing gigs were.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
went out and he moved to LA begrudgingly, but he ended up getting writing gigs on The Jeffersons, on a show called Eight is Enough, which was a huge
Mhm.
hit, The Waltons, which was a huge hit, and Sanford and Son.
Mhm.
So his buddy, Stan Lathan, who's a famous director, also Sanaa Lathan's father,
Okay.
um, for his Philadelphia buddy, was a director on Sanford and Son and got my dad a writing job. He was
Okay.
like, "Matt, you gotta come out of LA, you gotta come out of New York and you gotta come to LA. This is where it is." So he came and he did that. So,
Okay.
yeah, so he continued his career after Sesame Street, as a television writer.
Mhm. Okay. So he at least physically was near you guys and you got to kind of be in his presence,
Yeah.
still, even though they were kind of not mostly together at that point.
Yeah, they did not like each other at all, and that was weird as a child, of divorce, you just blame yourself and you feel like, "What did I do?" or "What did I say?" or all that, but at the end of the day, like, she was pretty good about not, turning us against him or anything
Yeah.
like that. She couldn't stand his ass, but she was very nice about not making us feel that way, even though he made that very hard. She just did a good job doing that.
Yeah.
And my dad, on the other hand, they just had two different ways of seeing things. Now, my mom now was okay, she's free now. We get to go to, she's not under his thumb. She's not just in Philly, no offense against Philly, but like everyone thought she was crazy to try to make this trip cross country.
Hmm.
We were fortunate enough to get the house we had no money. Fortunate enough to get the house of Cleavon Little, amazing actor who's
Yeah.
a star in a movie called Blazing Saddles, who
Yeah.
he was good friends with my mom and my dad was pissed at him because he gave us his house while
Wow.
he went on Broadway. He had a house in Malibu. He said, "You and Holly and Matt can come stay here
Wow.
back for free," because we didn't have any
Wow.
money. And he introduced her to his agent, and she got a job on the agent's desk. That
Yeah,
job, yeah, that
that's
job.
so cool. I read up on your mom because I kept, I follow her on Instagram now, and she'll post, different pictures with when Paul Rubens passed, and she posted a picture with him. Like, she knows a ton of people. Clearly, she's been in the business somehow. So I went and started doing my research on her, and she, her career has been just incredible. Was she she was an agent? Is that what she ended up
No, she was
doing?
a manager. So
Okay.
she was on an agent's desk, and the agency represented LeVar Burton, and this was the eve of Roots. And on the eve of Roots, it hadn't even come out yet, and somehow she snuck into a screening and was like, "Oh my god." And she uh found, connected with LeVar. He was only like 19, a student at USC, and the agency had already planned, was making a deal for him to go become like a runaway slave regular on Grizzly Adams. My mom was like, "That ain't the career move. That
No.
ain't it. That ain't it." It was so bizarre. So she took that intel and went to LeVar with it. And he was like, "Yeah, I know, but they're gonna give me $50,000. That's like, I don't have any money. That's a lot of money." And my mom was like, "I will give you $50,000 of my own money, not to take the job." She didn't have
Yeah.
$1,000. So she managed to convince him that to go with her. "Let me manage your career because you got
Wow.
so much that you're gonna be able to do. You are gonna be the you're gonna be you're gonna be the Michael Jordan of slaves by lack of a better term. You cannot go from being Kunta Kinte to playing some slave on TV and some
Right.
show." Anyway, he didn't call her bluff. He went with her, and they started a
Wow.
great career. So she's a manager, and then she went on to manage Wesley Snipes and Rosie Perez and Michael Clark Duncan and Martin Sheen, Pierce Brosnan. She's had an amazing career, and I didn't even start working with her until I was out of college. So
Your
uh,
mom is just something else. I mean,
something else, yeah. When you do the mom's version of this,
yeah.
I can talk more about her. She is, but at the end of the day, my dad was really threatened by her because she wasn't supposed to come out to LA and do all that.
Yeah.
And she hit it big. And then I went off to go to college, and that was around the time where my dad started to really open up to me about, oh, well, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and he was really emotional about, his health, and wanted to really have a talk with me about how he could have been a better dad, and talked about what happened as a child, which he never talked about,
Mm.
and tried to explain that that's why he probably wasn't as good a dad as he could have been. And boy, that was a moment. Like I remember that like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
Just him
Yeah.
opening up to me and just being, transparent during that time. It was quite deep, but it was a breakthrough moment in our lives. And that Parkinson's just took
Yeah.
him down, and just he passed at such a young age. So but he inspired a life of service for me, and left such a tremendous legacy.
Yeah. Just listening to you tell that part of your story with your dad, again, I'm kind of just in this space of like dads, and I don't know why, because my father passed. My father's name was Doyle Tucker, and he was a musician. He was a music minister. And so we traveled all over the United States and lived here, there, and everywhere because of him. But he was an unusual type. But He passed away at 63, so right, very close to the age that your dad did.
Oh, yeah.
But and he passed away of brain cancer, which in a way kind of feels like when people tell stories about diseases like Parkinson's or um, what is the other illness that reminds me a lot of it? But it just, Alzheimer's, yes, where it's just this degenerative kind of thing. What we
Yeah.
dealt with our dad, he passed in 2014. It felt like a bit of the same kind of thing, but just in fast motion, just fast forward that process. But we went through it all in probably 3 months and then he
Yes.
was gone, 3 to 6 months. We were not aware of it and he didn't make us aware of it. And it was a very dramatic situation how it all went down. I will not get into it now, but I think when he knew that he was ill, he wrote us a letter. And this is why you're kind of evoking something that feels very similar, because he wrote us this whole kind of expository thing. And it was just like, this is the reason that I've, made certain decisions and just all kinds of things that he normally would not have been so revelatory with us about. I don't even know that he knew he was ill when he wrote it, but he knew something was wrong. He knew something was off. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, Daddy, I see why, certain things have happened in the way that they haven't. And we still have that letter too, which helps us to really kind of reason and grapple with some of the decisions that he was making kind of later in his life. So that degenerative thing, which we got to watch happen right before our eyes, it was an honor to be there with him in the hospital and just be beside him in that process. And I know that for you, like, you did take on that caretaker role. He didn't want you necessarily to have to do that, but you did end up doing that, which I deeply identify with. Can you just talk to me about what that process was like? Because that's a long time for your dad to be ill from early 80s and he didn't pass away until the early 2000s. I can't even imagine having to walk that process out for 2 decades. What does that do to you? What was that experience like?
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that story, and the way that you laid that out is just it really it's just making me emotional because
Mm,
it was just a period of time, when you just kind of shorten that period of time that you went through in just months based on the 20 years of
mm,
just that degeneration, it just everything breaking down,
yeah.
like
I just
it's
can't even I can't get my head around it, Holly. I'm serious. For us to do that for 2 months, I cannot imagine what that process is. And
the
I
only thing that it brought it j the only thing that there was joy was that there were good days, right? There
yeah.
were days where we'd
Yes.
find a medicine that worked and he was doing good and he was kind of
Yeah.
and feel and then we would get, there would be medical breakthroughs. There would be moments where there was like, we'd learn about this kind of deep brain stimulation thing that we could get him. But the timing was such that it wasn't until, years later when we really had those things down. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
so it wasn't until years later, and so he didn't get the benefit of knowing how much exercise would have helped him. I
Wow.
remember telling him we started to hear those things, and I remember telling him, "Dad, if you can exercise, it's gonna make your symptoms go away." And he would be like, "Exercise? The hell, I can't even button my shirt. You
Mhm.
want me to exercise?" Like, and I'd be like, it was really hard because he was just so frustrated. He didn't really understand why his body was doing this.
Yeah.
It wasn't until 2002 when Muhammad Ali came to our HollyRod Foundation fundraiser, when it changed, it put HollyRod on the map, put our nonprofit on the map. He said
Yeah.
he would come, him and his wife said he would come, and I was like, "Yeah, right." And then when he showed up, we were about to fold it up because it was really too hard for us to fundraise because it was Michael J. Fox and nobody. This was when we were really just fundraising for Parkinson's and compassionate care,
Mhm.
not autism yet. But anyway, when the champ came and was at the event and sat and talked with him and was just like, "Yo, man, look at what we're doing. Like, look at this, hang in there," and gave him that love.
Mm.
It lifted him so much for
Wow.
quite a bit of time until he started sort of going downhill again. But I think what triggered my tears and what made me emotional was just, just realizing there was so much time, but so much of the time was spent where he couldn't talk and he
Mm.
couldn't express himself and he couldn't walk. He was just, his body was just frozen due
Yeah.
to Parkinson's. And so even though there was essentially almost 20 years from the time he was diagnosed to the time he passed away, they were just they weren't quality,
Mhm.
because and I'd had babies and he really couldn't connect with them or talk to them. My second my third baby, second pregnancy, because I had twins first, they my I was 9 months pregnant when my dad passed away.
Mm.
Delivered probably like, you know, well, let's see. Yeah, probably by a week after we laid him to rest.
Wow.
Yeah, so it
Wow.
was intense. But, it those days were hard.
Yeah.
But I talk a lot about the caregiving piece because I know there's a lot of people out there that are caregiving for their fathers and their loved ones right now,
Mhm.
and it's very hard, and I'm always telling people to make sure you get your care too.
Yeah.
Like, make sure you care for yourself because you cannot pour from an empty
Yeah.
cup. You just can't. Now, I was, like, 19 and a lot younger, when he first got diagnosed, and then, still pretty young when he was, when he passed. But, now, in the pushing 60, like, it's hard to take care of people,
Mhm.
and especially if you're in the sandwich generation where you're taking care of kids and
Yes.
and your parents. So that caregiving was tough. It was
Mhm.
really hard, but I've spoken a lot about it. I try to advocate for caregivers as much as I can, try to tell them to get their care in as well, to walk, to exercise, to meditate, to do all kinds of things, to help them, not lose themselves, um, so that they can take better care of the people they love.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking about, the just the logistics of your life, and we've been aware of a lot of this because you've done a pretty good job communicating a lot of this to us. So I've been aware of, the fact that you were a caretaker for your father. I've been aware of the fact that, you were a mom and a wife and you were having, multiple children. You didn't have a small family. I mean, you really went for it. And so just to think about, as you said, being that sandwich generation, having a father who was ill while having your children at the same time. And it's just amazing to me that you have had any kind of a career in this, in these ensuing years. I mean, how did all of that, I guess, impact your ability to focus on your actual career, being an actress and doing the various things that you do? I mean, what was that like? Was it just like shut everything down and just focus on this?
It was just having a great team between my husband, who was playing football at the time, who's very understand he wasn't always there, but when he was present.
Yeah.
Between my mom, who basically helped me raise my twins and, all my kids, but especially my twins, that allowed me to go back to work. I went to work on that show, For Your Love. I was pregnant during the pilot and went back to work on that show when the twins were 3 months old. I couldn't have done that without a great team around me.
Mhm.
Some people I hired, but basically my family was there. Like, they just picked up the slack and said, "Okay, you still gotta work, you gotta get
Mhm.
out there," and then just people that just were so, I call them angels on the path, right? Those people in your life that just say, "I see what you're trying to do, and I'm gonna make it
Yeah.
easier."
Yes. Yeah.
Yvette Lee Bowser. Now, she's somebody who is, someone I went to high school with, who ended up, she's the executive producer and showrunner, writer, creator of For Your Love. But she
Okay.
also created Living Single. She also created or wrote on The Different World. Dear White People, she worked on, and Run the World. I think she's a co-executive producer, creative. I mean, she's just a juggernaut. This is a
Mm.
Black woman who was my buddy in high school when we were 15. Never thought we would end up doing TV together. But when I had those twins and they were 3 months old, she created a nursery for me so I could go to work. I could have that nursery there. She knew when it was time for me to nurse. So
Mm.
she's like, okay, get in there. I see what's going on. Let's go. Like, she
Wow.
made a space for me to be a professional and work and raise kids at the same time.
Mm.
She also was pregnant around the same time. So, and there was another cast member that had a baby. So she created a space for us to work and raise kids.
Wow.
But not for her. I don't think I would have ever had the chance to work so soon, to go back to work so soon, and yet still feel so completely connected to my twins.
Wow.
So for obvious reasons, she's the godmother of my kids, and she's
Mhm.
somebody that I love so much. And I just shout her out because every now and then those people come around that will make your life so much easier and allow you to achieve the dreams and goals that you are looking for. And when it's a Black woman
Yes. Yeah.
who was again ahead of her time and what she was creating, it's just she's just my favorite person. Like I think
Mm.
of her and I go, wow, like we need 50,000 more Yvettes in
Yeah.
this world.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show when space is given and when space is created for people that don't necessarily fit the profile of those that should be successful. So you have a Black woman here who's creating a space for another Black woman. There are all kinds of great things that can come from that, and it's so necessary. And it's one of the reasons that focusing on diversity and equity and inclusion in all spaces is so important. And I hate the idea that that is being minimized in any way right now in our culture, because
It
you
is.
never know the stories that will come from that. Just creating space, understanding what the needs are on a deeper level. I mean, if you had a man that was a boss that was a white man, it's very possible that that wouldn't have happened for you. And so, hearing more of those stories, I think, is essential.
It's
Um,
very possible, and it is one of those things where you don't. I think I realized it at the time. I couldn't believe it. Obviously, I was very grateful, but looking back and trying to see spaces where that might happen today, they're just. I don't think they're there. So yeah, that was a game changer for me, to continue doing what I wanted to do, and that show, that body of work, those 89 or 90 episodes that we were able to produce of that show, they're some of my favorite TV moments, and they don't happen if Yvette Lee Bowser does not say, "Bring them babies to
yeah,
work, and we will work the schedule around you."
yeah, that's amazing. Well, I have to go find that show now because you've talked
Yes,
about
we
it,
do.
and it was
We've been begging. I think Bounce TV has it on now. I think
oh,
but
okay.
we've been trying to lobby to get it streamed, and I think now that there's this crazy strike, I have a feeling that we're going to be seeing it. They just keep going in the coffers to get more content.
Mhm.
But yes, please check out For Your Love. You will love. It's so cute, and it's funny, and it's still relevant. And we had amazing. I was just looking the other day at just the list of guest stars that we've had. Everyone from Naomi Campbell to Shaquille O'Neal to,
Wow,
just really fun stuff. So
that's
For
so
Your Love.
cool. Yeah, and I don't want to let you go before I talk about your work with autism. You were one of the early folks that kind of brought this that brought that to our awareness, autism to our awareness. And now since then, I've had several nieces and nephews that have been diagnosed with autism or somewhere on the spectrum. And I think for a lot of people, we all have had, our lives have all been impacted by autism in some way. Especially if there are young people in your life, if you have children, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, somebody somewhere, a friend's child or something, you're going to probably know somebody whose life has been impacted by autism. And I've heard you speak very frankly and very honestly about the fear that you first dealt with when that diagnosis first came, but then you have just found a way to create such activity and beauty and creativity and just awareness around it since then. So can you kind of speak to parents who are maybe going through this? Because I have multiple siblings who have children who have been diagnosed with this, and they are in the thick of it. They're fighting that battle day to day. So can you kind of talk to those parents or caretakers?
I could talk for hours and hours about this topic, so I'm gonna try to tap into my concise gene, which I really don't possess. Um, the reason why we started talking about autism was because when we got the diagnosis in 2000, we saw no books. We saw
Mm.
no celebrity platforms
Yep.
being used, even though we knew people in the Hollywood community that had people that had children on the spectrum, but chose not to speak about it.
Mhm.
That's fine, but it's not for everyone to share their business.
Mhm.
At first, Rodney didn't want me to talk about it because he didn't want to label his boy,
Yeah.
right? He didn't want to label his child, and he didn't want to limit him.
Yeah.
But I was like, if we talk about it, somebody else will see and will feel seen and heard.
Mhm.
And that will take so much. Oh, sorry, my husband just came in. I'm doing a live. Oh, you want the dog in? Okay. Sorry. Live.
It's okay.
Dog was scratching to get in here. Um, and so for us, we knew we had to share our story
Mhm.
because we did not see anyone having these conversations.
Yeah.
And I felt so disenfranchised when I got the diagnosis.
Mm.
We were told everything our son would never do. He was 3 years old. And one of the things they said he would never do was, oh, there were so many things, but one was have meaningful employment.
Mm.
Now, as he's 25 and just left for work, in his car, which they said he'd never drive, we
Wow.
wanted to share his life,
Mm.
because
Mhm.
I didn't see any examples of what the possibilities would be for RJ.
Mhm.
Nobody, and people may have been sharing them in ways that I didn't see, but I didn't see anybody using their platform in a real meaningful, aggressive way.
Mhm.
So we had that conversation. Rodney didn't want to really share. I did. I won because I win all the arguments. Let's keep it real. I win them all. I just had a sheer persistence. No, I presented to him. I said, I know this will be better in the long run. You'll see. We're going to be able to help so many people. And much like we were doing for Parkinson's, even
Mhm.
talking about Parkinson's disease, which was something a lot of people weren't talking about in caregiving and what the compassionate care that these families need. Um, and so it was important that we share our story. And we shared it via 2 reality shows we did, one for OWN network called For Pete's Sake, and then Hallmark picked it up after OWN let it go, called Meet the Pete's. And we talked about everything that this young man did, from him dealing with online bullying, from him dealing with bullying at school, from him trying to get his driver's license, what that was like, saving his money, him and the police getting
Mm.
stopped, what that looks like for a Black child or young man with autism to get stopped by
Mm.
the. We knew we had so many stories and aspects of what autism looks like, especially in the Black community, and
Mhm.
we had. And so that's the mission that we've been on really for the last, I want to say and I want to say this to people who may be just getting the diagnosis. I haven't always been Norma Ray pumping my fist, standing up on a, platform. When RG got the diagnosis, I went inward. Rodney
Mhm.
went inward, like denial inward, and he got out of that, thank God. But I didn't even want to share the story. It wasn't until he was 9, like 7 or 8, where I really started talking publicly about it. And I went on the Oprah show and cried my eyes out and did all that. I say that because I don't want people to think that when you get it, you just go, okay, let's roll up our sleeves. And now it's a process, and there's a grieving process, and you got
Mhm.
to go through that. That said, this has been a journey of advocacy that I feel so blessed to be part of. I love talking to families. I spend probably, I want to say, 25% of my life talking on the phone to families,
Mm.
just giving them 2 hours at a time, just saying, "Hey, this is what I wish somebody would have told me.
Yeah.
I didn't have any guidance." Um, but at the end of the day, autism is a disorder
Mhm.
that a lot of people don't even know what it is. It's a disorder that you see manifested through communication and speech. It's a spectrum disorder. All that means is it's on a spectrum that can be you can be a child who's nonverbal and can't connect verbally, but can connect in other ways. You
Mhm.
can be a child who's highly verbal, but you can't look someone in the eye and make a friend.
Mhm.
So so many different ways and all the in ways in between. And when we saw the amount of the prevalence and the amount of people who were impacted by autism,
Yeah.
but no one was talking for them,
Yeah.
giving them some kind of platform, we were like, oh, we got to do this.
Yeah.
So it's been an awesome journey. HollyRod Foundation morphed into an awesome autism organization as well as Parkinson's. Um, and it's been just it's God's mission for me. And and somebody told me that when he first got diagnosed, and I think I cussed them out so bad, like, "Oh, this is what God wants you to do." I said, "No, that's not what you want to hear when you first get the diagnosis because you feel like you're so lost and freaked out, and like
Yeah.
someone's telling you this is a blessing." I was like,
Mhm.
"Get up out of here with that blessing." But when I tell you the blessings,
Mm.
when I tell you the people that have stopped us and told us the difference that our advocacy and us talking about it and the hope that RJ's situation gave them,
Yeah. Yes.
I just feel overwhelmed.
Yeah.
It's overwhelming. You
Well, I
just made
mean,
me cry today, girl. I was gonna wear my eyelashes for you, but I'm glad I didn't because they would have been off.
well, I mean, you've reached, I was probably in college at that time. And, when I guess when that diagnosis would have happened or when you started talking about it or whatever. But I mean, shoot, I was in Oklahoma at the time. You reached me, someone who otherwise would not have known anything really about autism. And like I said, at that time, I didn't know what it was. And I
Right.
didn't have nieces and nephews who had been diagnosed. And now I do. And it's like, it's not as scary as it would have been if you
Well,
hadn't done the work that you had. So
that is
thank
so
you.
happy to makes me so happy to hear. And we saw that there were no books, so we wrote them. We wrote like
Yeah.
5 books between our family. Rodney wrote a book called "Not My Boy," and just talking about this, him having to get out of denial, basically. I thought that was
Mhm.
really powerful because a lot of times dads process this differently, especially Black
Yeah.
dads that are Black who
Yeah.
in our community, we don't talk about this stuff, so
Mhm.
very important. And then I wrote books with RJ and also with his twin sister. And so we have My Brother Charlie and Charlie Makes a Splash. Those are 2 children's books.
Mhm.
And then there's a book called Same But Different, and that is a book about middle school because kids in middle school can I don't know why they can be so cruel and
Yeah.
cold-blooded, but that was a real difficult time for RJ at school, and we shared that. So, I will continue to support families. I will continue to advocate for not only autism, but for Parkinson's. My brother Matt has Parkinson's. Not sure if you knew that.
Yes.
Yep,
Yes.
and so Matt is only 62-ish, and he
Mhm.
was diagnosed in his 50s, young onset
Mm.
like my dad. And so we will continue to advocate for those families as well and for compassionate care and to talk about a lot of the great things that Parkinson's, the breakthroughs, been so many amazing breakthroughs
Mhm.
right now. A lot of great advocacy. We'll continue to do that.
Yeah. I don't want to let you go before asking you how Matt is doing. How is your brother doing?
Right now, he's not doing so great. Like he just called the other day and he's like, this damn disease, like it's a real mind game
Mhm.
because you have to trick this um basically synthetic dopamine. You have to trick this into how it works in your body. People with Parkinson's or know about or have loved ones with Parkinson's will understand when your body's on and your body's off, right?
Mhm.
And so the idea of these medicines, you have to sort of play this crazy game with them in order to get your body to respond properly.
Mhm.
But he's doing some great therapies. There are some really awesome surgery options these days for deep
Mhm.
brain stimulation, where people actually have, in they actually have what's the word I'm looking for? Not insert
Implants?
implants in
Mhm.
their brains. Sounds scary, but it is doing some miraculous work, results for people to just function in life.
Yeah.
So he's doing that just okay right now.
Mhm.
But my brother is he's the life of the party. Like Matt is happy go. You know, back in high school when you get the best popular and most
Mhm.
popular, best personality, Matt got happy go lucky. Like he's that cat. So he has a very bright outlook on everything. The thing that he's doing the most that's helping him is boxing.
Oh, wow.
Parkinson's boxing.
Uh-huh.
So that's something that is very, very, and the irony that, Muhammad Ali and then the boxing and that it's
Yeah.
really cool. So, anybody out there that's dealing with Parkinson's or dealing with someone, a loved one with Parkinson's, keep them moving, keep
Yeah.
moving. That is really an amazing way to stave off these symptoms and to
Mhm.
have a better quality of life.
Yeah. Well, Holly, thank you so much for sharing just so much of your life with us. You're just one of those folks who people feel like they know because you have been so generous about just sharing your life and the struggles that you've dealt with and the joys and all of it. And it's like somebody's going to connect with it. Somebody's going to identify with it. So you're more than just an actress. You're a whole person. So thank you for being a whole person for us and for sharing about your dad here, because I feel
Well,
like he should
thank
be a
you
helpful
for
thing.
having this amazing idea. When I first I'm gonna give you, some flowers real quick. When I first saw you, you were the first time I think I saw you was when you were doing that breakdown on Sesame Street. And I might have seen a couple other ones too, but that one obviously caught my eye because it was about
Mhm.
my dad, and it was so beautifully done.
Oh,
It
thank
was
you,
so
Holly.
beautifully done. It was thoughtful. I'm like, wow, this lady's really, you're just a real gift to us.
Thank you.
You're a real gift. You have the most fantabulous voice. Like your voice is so smooth. And then the information that you share with us in a way that we can really hear it. Um, it's fabulous. It's thought provoking, and it's something that I look forward to whenever now that I follow you or see you. I'm like, oh, what's she going to talk about? Like, how is she going to deliver it? So, thank you for having this idea to. You're thinking about your dad.
Yeah.
Thank you for including me. Sorry I was so emotional.
No,
Like
hey.
I mean, it's just you understand, we love
Oh,
our
yeah.
and seeing them leave us is
Yeah.
tough.
It's tough.
Seeing them leave us is tough. My dad, the anniversary of his death was just a couple weeks ago.
Wow.
And I always know that because my son, right, his birthday, he was born just a very short time
Mhm.
after my dad passed. So we always laugh and say they crossed each other, and they are very much alike in so many ways. And like somehow my son knows all the songs that my dad used to listen to, like
Wow.
Louis Jordan and like
Oh,
old
wow.
blues songs and stuff. I'm like, how do you know that song? He's like, no. So anyway, thank you for this time, and I appreciate it. And oh, we've been
Absolutely. Just
talking for a while. I just look at how much time
oh,
gone by.
yeah. Yeah.
I appreciate you so much. And so anytime
Mhm.
you want to talk again, please reach out.
I might be tugging on your coattails again, but thank you for making time for me, Holly. I really appreciate it. This is so meaningful, and I'm so looking forward to sharing this with people.
My pleasure. Let's talk again soon.
Okay, yes,
All right.
absolutely. Thank you
Take
so much.
care. You
All right,
got
you
it.
too.